It is a drizzly high noon, 12 o'clock, out here at the Ashtoon Studio in East Tennessee on Thursday, July the 30th, 2020. And there's something that has been on my mind recently. I felt the need to just turn on the camera and make a quick little talking video. Oh, hello there. Yeah, there's Nestor. Channel mascot. There's the cameo, the channel mascot. Simply, I wanted to just say that you're blessed. Even though you might not feel like it, even though you're stressed, and everybody is wearing masks, and there is cause for worry, I just wanted to remind us all that we're blessed. We are. First off, there has been times here in America when things were a lot bleaker than this. A lot. In the 1860s, throughout the 1860s, during the Civil War, that was a war that started, and a lot of people thought it was just going to be another Revolutionary War. In the Revolutionary War, 25,000 Americans died, and it was over relatively quickly. But the Civil War lasted 4 years, and 620,000 Americans died. To give you some kind of perspective on that, if you were to take all of the soldiers that died in World War I, II, the Revolutionary War, Korean War, and Vietnam, and you added all of those together, it would be just a few thousand more. It was so bad. And this was the 1860s, let me remind you. And it was so bad that the armies would be out there and winter would set in. Winter would set in, and so they couldn't fight anymore. They had to hunker down for the winter. So just, bands of soldiers with one or two changes of clothes to their name, just whatever they could carry on their back, and their little flintlock rifle, they would come up to a forest of like pine trees or something, and they would just cut them down, many times just leaving the bark right on the tree, and they would make log cabins. Small log cabins with these very crude fireplaces. They were drafty, they were made in a hurry, they were made with poor equipment, and that's where they would try to winter. And they would start dying. They would die of, jaundice and typhoid and scarlet fever, because the conditions were not sanitary, and they were stuck in there together. And the cold would wreak havoc on their immune system, and they would just start dying. They would get sick, and they would just start dying. And the amount of soldiers that died just from those conditions during the winter was close to the amount that actually died from gunshot wounds. And if you were shot, the medical conditions back then were so bad that if you were shot in the arm, they would just cut your arm off. There was none of this, oh, let's get a surgeon in here to try to reconnect the nerves and see if we can save this finger or save this hand. It was, you were shot with musket balls that were, just lead, and they would spin. And when they would hit, they would grind up, and, splinters of bone would shoot off into the muscle. And instead of trying to get in there and clean it out with and save it with their limited supplies and conditions, they would just say, let's just make a clean cut right there and just cut it off. And so you had to put a wooden stick in your mouth and bite down on it while they sawed right through it, and they'd cut it off. Then they would just wrap it up and cauterize it. And they would throw you on a straw mattress if you were lucky. Sometimes it was just a rope hammock. And they would just hope that you would get over it, that infection wouldn't set in, and you wouldn't just die anyway. And in that war, 620,000 men died. The conditions in the prisoner of war camps were almost as bad as Nazi concentration camps. People were dying of jaundice and starvation, especially in the southern prisoner of war camps, because they weren't going to spend, they were already poor, and they weren't going to spend money on prisoners of war if their soldiers were in need. You know, the soldiers came first, and the prisoners of war they were emaciated, and that happened on this soil here in America, you know, not no more than a couple hundred years ago. Alright, so let's move ahead now to the 1940s during World War II, while all of our armies and soldiers were out there fighting Nazis that were fighting the good fight against the communists that were trying to take over the world. Back here in America, the government was saying, please grow gardens. You know, even to the families that came, you know, the blue blood families that just weren't used to ever getting their hands dirty, and they were asked to please grow a garden. If you've got a yard that can do it, please grow a garden. They called them victory gardens. And that was because they didn't think they were going to have enough produce to feed everyone, because all the farmers that normally make the produce were over there overseas fighting the Nazis. So please grow victory gardens to feed yourself. We don't know if we're going to be able to. Wow, I mean, we're complaining now because you're limited to 1 6-pack of Mountain Dew. I think they may have even lifted that, but I think you're still limited to 1 pack of toilet paper per family per day. Yeah, it wasn't just that though. They were saying, please bring metal, any metal that you can, because we need to recycle them and use them to make armor and aircraft carriers and bullets and airplanes for the war efforts. You know, so you had roving bands of middle school up to teenage kids just going around neighborhoods collecting trash and looking for scrap cars and old metal pieces, old farming equipment that had been abandoned anywhere, and just grabbing it all and you know, they wanted to help their dad or whoever it was out, you know, fighting. We're sending this off to the war effort. And it even got to where it was paper. Paper was going off to the war effort. That's why a lot of 1940s comics are so rare, because they ran ads in the back of the comic saying, we need paper to be taken to the recycler and used for the war effort. And so a lot of those old comics got thrown into the recycler. So it got to where essential things like bags of flour and sugar, and I think even like beans and stuff like that, you actually had to have not just the money to pay for it, but you had to have a coupon. You had to apply for and show that you had this many people to feed, and you know your house was in this much need, and you would get these coupons. You had to have the coupon and the money to pay for that bag of flour. And it was to the point where people were using their coffee grounds and their tea bags over and over again until the coffee and the tea was just so weak. But it was either that or just drink water, because you couldn't get tea. I mean, unsweetened tea actually, that whole concept started in the 1940s during the war, because there wasn't enough sugar to sweeten the tea anymore. A lot of you have probably also read A Hidden Place by Corrie ten Boom. It's her autobiography of you know, living in Nazi-occupied Holland in the 1940s. Now things got there. It was to the point where electricity would just get cut off, and they couldn't use a flashlight because batteries and flashlights were just, you couldn't find those either. So they had a bicycle that when you pedaled it, the power would transfer to the little headlight. So they would prop the back wheel up off the ground, and they would take turns pedaling the bike. So the headlight would come on, and then somebody would sit there and read out loud. So they would have some kind of entertainment. They could listen to a story and forget their situation until the person on the bike got tired, and they would switch off, and they would read into the night, read stories. And yeah, their bicycles. You know, that was the only way they would get around. So and rubber was so hard to come by that they would wear the inner tube and the tire right off the rim and just clatter around on the rim for a while. And then they would start tying old cloths and rags wrapped real tight, just tie that around the rim and try to get around on that. So that's how bleak things got. And then on top of that, now we've got, you know, the Great Depression, which I think that was going on during the same time. Maybe I think they overlap some too. And a lot of you either read or watched the movie The Grapes of Wrath, and you know how it got to where, you know, families were out of work and they couldn't, you know, they just liquidate as much as they could, take all their most important possessions and just pile them onto a truck, and just by word of mouth they might hear that there's some work somewhere. And they would just start driving. And so a lot of times it'd be like California or to a big city or something like that. And very quickly, if there was any work to be had, it was the need was met. Workers would just show up. And so they would have police that would stop people in California and whatnot, and just kind of stop people. They would see a car that was piled up with you know, packs and big families, and they would stop them and just say, "I'm sorry, I know you guys are looking for work, but they're full. There's no more work to be had where you're going." And they would just have to say, "Well, we don't have enough gas to go anywhere else. What are we going to do?" A lot of them would get stuck out in a field somewhere. Even the kids. You can still find it. You know, videos of little kids that are living in tents on the side of the road, and they're sleeping, and they're doing this because they're dreaming of picking peas or something like that. They're picking vegetables in their dreams. Little kids that are so young now that you couldn't put them to work because there's child labor laws, rightfully so, but now there's child labor laws in place to protect kids, little elementary school age kids, from that kind of work. But that's what they were doing to try to live, to try to get to the next day, to survive. Also during that time, your wild deer that you see run across the road or on the sides of the roads, and your wild turkeys you see walking across fields in little groups, and even fish in rivers and streams, they started disappearing. You didn't see them much anymore. And that was because people were out hunting and fishing, not for sport, but because they were hungry, because they wanted a way to feed their kids. Even right here in the Great Smokies, where I live, if you look at the history and the poverty that people had to live through, these you know, Irish immigrants that came over to try to escape the potato famine, or you know, Europeans and that were escaping indentured servitude and trying to get out here to the mountains and build their log cabins and get their little homesteads and try to eke out a living. They would make these little log cabins that were smaller than my studio and try to raise a family of, you know, 8, 10 kids. And they had to have a lot of kids because they needed the hands to help with the work. And they would have to build a loft, you know, so the kids could go up a ladder and try to squeeze into a space up there and try to get a night's sleep, and then get out and just, a lot of times they couldn't afford shoes, and they would have to go around barefoot and during the winter try to get to school and try to warm up by the Franklin stove in the middle of the schoolhouse. And it was rare for a family to make it to the next generation, for the kids to get up old enough to move out and start their own farms and their own families without a bunch of the kids dying. And it was all the same thing. Scarlet fever and smallpox and typhoid and jaundice and all these things, dangerous conditions and snake bites and farming accidents. You know, that's why even to now, country music and bluegrass music has that soulful kind of sad sound to it, because that's still left over from those days when moms and families were in mourning a lot. Now, please don't think that I'm telling you all this thinking that you didn't already know it. I'm not trying to be preachy here and act like I'm, you know, more educated than any one of you. You've all read books, had the same required reading when you were in school, probably watched a lot of the same movies I have. You've all been through Abraham Lincoln's autobiography or biography, or Harriet Tubman's story and Red Badge of Courage, and plenty of World War II stories out there. You all already know all of this. I'm aware of that. I just kind of wanted to do a reminder because I look around me and all the looks on people's faces, it's just everybody is so scared. It's fear and anxiety and stress, and a bunch of news anchors, tapping their papers and looking directly into the camera, and just that end of the world tone that I'm getting from everyone. All the complaining and the fear and the panic buying. I think we're focusing on that, and we're not remembering. We're not remembering those times when things were much worse. And the people that lived through those times, they looked for their blessings, and they found respites where they could. And when they had those new pair of shoes that came their way, and they had those little windfalls, they felt relief and blessed by the little that they had. And I think we should do the same thing. Right now, where you're sitting, you're probably within a few hundred yards at the most of a faucet that you can turn and get clean drinking water out of. You're probably not going hungry. You're probably not getting your rifle and going hunting because you are hoping that you'll find a deer so that you can bring it home and feed your family. You're probably not grabbing your fishing pole and going to the lake to catch dinner. You might be going there because you can't go to social gatherings right now and you've got some time on your hands and you just want to go have some fun. But to fish because you're hungry and you want to make dinner, that's something you haven't experienced yet. So I think we are blessed. We are blessed for the time period that we're in and the conveniences that we have. And I don't know the bleakness of your situation. It might be worse than what I'm thinking. You might have gotten an eviction notice and you might have to go move in with a family member or move into your car for a little while. You might be out of work for a bit and you might be getting hungry, but just don't forget there are food banks out there. And don't be too prideful to go take advantage of them. That's why they're there. So your situation might be pretty bleak. It might be pretty bad, but just know that we are blessed. So with all of the stressful, dire tone that is coming from all of the talking heads right now, let me take a step back, take a breath, and put this into perspective. We are not living through an outbreak of Spanish flu. We're not living through a mutated super version of the bird flu, or even the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, whatever you call it, or even smallpox or scarlet fever. We're not living through those. We are living through a plague, but it's one that we have never encountered before. And because of the unknown nature of it, it's causing a lot of stress and apprehension. But realistically, it kills 1 out of every 200 people that are infected by it. Now, don't think I am trivializing that one person. Every life is precious. And I have even known, actually it's only one person so far that I've known that has died from it. So please know that I'm not trivializing. And if we did have all the millions of people get infected, as a lot of people are saying, herd immunity, just let everybody get exposed to it and we'll develop immunity to it, that 1 out of every 200 adds up to hundreds of thousands of people, and I don't like that many deaths. So I'm not for going that route. But please, please do not lose sight of your blessings. Do not lose sight of the fact that if you were to be able to speak to someone down through time, somebody living through the Great Depression right now, that has lost their home, and their family is living in a tent beside a road next to a field where they go pick, they pick vegetables. And their children are sleeping doing this because they're dreaming that they're picking peas. And you were able to speak to that person and say, this time period that I'm in is awful. It's terrible, it's stressful because I can't find toilet paper, I can't go to a sports game and I have to wear a mask. They would look at you like, are you crazy? You're blessed. You're blessed. And so in a nutshell, that's really all I was trying to say. It may be a long way around to it, but we're blessed. And just please put things in perspective. Remember that. And also, just turn off the news. Just turn them right off. Because that's all they're doing, is on loop. And this is all they talk about. They talk about the fear and the spread and the numbers and the big red maps. And they just have that tone and the seriousness of it, and they're looking directly into the camera, and that's all they talk about. And it's just there, they just put the fear out there, and put the fear out there, and put the fear out there. And that fear keeps you watching, hoping maybe those numbers will go down, but it keeps you watching. And remember that when you watch, you're voting. That is your vote. You vote with your watch time. And so, if they're putting out fear, and you're spending your watch time watching it, you're voting for more of it. So, the fear makes you watch, the watching makes them produce more of the fear, and it loops, and builds, and loops, and builds. So, don't put yourself through that kind of stress. That ominous music, and the logos that float in, and that camera that sweeps in towards those newscasters that do nothing but talk about fear. And talk about bad numbers, and talk about, that's what it's going to do. It's just going to keep looping and building and looping and building. And you have the power right here in your hand. That remote that's got that red button on the top of it, turn them off. Just turn them off. And remember that you're blessed. Alright, that's all I had to say. I hope this video doesn't go too awful long. But if you've enjoyed it, please hit that thumbs up like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. Remember to turn on notifications by hitting the bell. I'll talk to you down in the comments. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.